In the forests of Finland, where ancient pines stand so thick the sun barely penetrates, there are stories about the Huldra folk, the hidden people, beautiful spirits who live beneath hills and inside hollow trees. They watch humans, sometimes help, sometimes harm, and sometimes they take what they want. Children are their favorite. Babies stolen from cradles, replaced with changelings. Fairy children left to live human lives while the stolen babies grow up in the other world. Most families never know. The changeling becomes their child, grows, dies, the substitution complete. But some changelings never quite fit, never quite belong, never quite feel human. This is a story about a young man who discovered he was a changeling, about the family who'd lost their real son 30 years ago, and about the journey into the other world to make the trade that should have been impossible. Mikael Virtanen was 28 years old. He'd lived his entire life in the small Finnish town of Savonlinna, had a good job, good friends, a loving family. But he'd always felt wrong, different, like he didn't quite fit in his own skin, like he was living someone else's life. He'd attributed it to anxiety, to some unnamed mental health issue, saw therapists, took medication. Nothing helped. The feeling of wrongness persisted, got stronger as he aged. By his 28th birthday, it was overwhelming, like his body was rejecting him, like reality itself was trying to expel him. That's when the dreams started, vivid, recurring. He dreamed of a different family, a beautiful woman with eyes like forest pools, a man tall as trees with bark-like skin. They called him by a different name, the Serpent. They showed him memories, growing up in a place that wasn't quite real. Underground halls lit by bioluminescent moss, forests where the trees sang, creatures that shouldn't exist. And they told him the truth. He wasn't human, wasn't Mikael Virtanen. He was a changeling, swapped at birth, raised by humans while their real son grew up in the other world. And now, after 28 years, his true nature was asserting itself. He was being called home, back to the Huldra folk, back to where he belonged. Mikael woke from these dreams terrified, convinced he was losing his mind. But the dreams came every night, got more detailed, more real, and things started happening. His reflection didn't always match his movements. His shadow moved independently. Plants around him grew faster, unnaturally fast. Animals watched him with two intelligent eyes. He was changing, becoming what he really was, something not human. He went to his parents, tried to explain. They were concerned, suggested more therapy, more medication. But then Mikael asked them to tell him about his birth, exactly how it happened, where, when. His mother went pale. His father grew quiet. After a long silence, his mother admitted something they'd never told him. When Mikael was 3 days old, he'd changed, literally changed. One night they'd put a baby with brown eyes to bed. The next morning, the baby had blue eyes, different features, different temperament, different everything. They'd thought it was impossible. Eyes don't change overnight. Features don't shift. But they had. The doctors had no explanation, said they must be misremembering. But they knew, they'd noticed, had even discussed it. But what could they do? This was their baby, in their house. They'd accepted it, loved him, raised him as their son. But they'd always known something had happened that night, something they couldn't explain. Mikael felt his world collapse. He wasn't crazy, wasn't imagining things. He really was a changeling, which meant somewhere the real Mikael Virtanen existed, in the other world, living a life that should have been his. And Mikael, or Yu, as his true name was living a life that belonged to someone else. The wrongness he'd felt his entire life wasn't psychological. It was literal. He was in the wrong world, living the wrong life, being the wrong person. He asked his parents what they wanted. Did they want their real son back? The one who'd been taken? His parents looked at each other. His mother wept. Sighed she'd always wondered, had always mourned. But she loved Mikael too. Loved the boy she'd raised, even if he wasn't the one she'd birthed. Mashal made a decision. He would go to the other world, find the real Mikael Virtanen, offer to trade places, give his parents their real son back, and return to where he belonged. His parents protested, said it was dangerous, said they'd already lost one son, didn't want to lose another. But Mikael insisted. He couldn't live like this, couldn't continue being someone he wasn't. He had to try, had to make this right. He researched, found folklore, found stories about how to enter the other world, about places where the barrier was thin, about offerings that opened doors, about music that called the Huldra folk. He found a place, a specific hill in the forest, ancient, sacred, known locally as a fairy mound. On Midsummer's Eve, when the barrier between worlds was thinnest, Mikael went to the hill, brought offerings, honey, milk, silver coins, played music on his grandfather's kantala, a traditional Finnish string instrument, sang old songs his mother had taught him, songs she'd learned from her grandmother, songs that predated Christianity, that called to the old spirits, the old powers, the hidden folk. As midnight approached, the hill opened, not physically, but dimensionally, a door that existed in perception rather than space. Mikael walked through, into the other world, into the realm of the Huldra folk, into the place he'd been born. The other world was beautiful and terrible, forests that glowed, rivers that flowed upward, a sky with too many stars and a moon that was the wrong color, creatures that defied description, humanoid but not human, beings made of elements, of concepts, of pure magic, and in the distance, a hall, made of living wood, growing, breathing, pulsing with life. That's where Mikael walked, drawn by instinct, by memory, by blood. The hall doors opened as he approached. Inside, he found them, the Huldra couple from his dreams, his true parents. They recognized him immediately, called him Karamyu, embraced him, sighed he'd finally come home. They'd been waiting, calling, trying to bring him back. His human life was ending, his true nature emerging. He belonged here, with them, forever. But Mikael explained. He'd come to make a trade, to return the real Mikael Virtanen, to set things right. His Huldra parents looked at each other, sad, understanding. They'd known this might happen, that their changeling son might develop attachments to the human world, might feel loyalty to the family that raised him. They said the real Mikael was there, in the other world, had been for 28 years. He'd grown up as one of the Huldra folk, believed he was one of them, didn't remember being human, didn't know he'd been stolen. Taking him back would traumatize him, would rip him from the only life he knew. Was that really better? Was that really making things right? Mikael asked to meet him, to see him, to understand who he was. His Huldra parents agreed, led him deeper into the hall, to a room where a young man sat. He looked almost like Mikael, similar features, similar build, but with brown eyes instead of blue, with something indefinably human in his face rather than something indefinably other. This was the real Mikael Virtanen, raised by the Huldra folk, living in the other world, believing it was his home. Mikael approached, introduced himself, explained the situation. The human Mikael stared, confused, disbelieving, said this was his home. These were his parents. He wasn't human, wasn't stolen. This was his life. The changeling Mikael realized the problem. Both of them felt they were in the wrong place. Both of them felt they didn't belong. The human Mikhail had grown up in the other world feeling wrong, feeling out of place, feeling like he didn't quite fit, just as the changeling Mikhail had felt in the human world. They'd both been living wrong lives, both suffering, both believing they were failures or broken, when in reality, they were just in the wrong places. Mikhail explained this, showed the human Mikhail his own feelings, his own sense of not belonging, asked if he'd ever dreamed of another life, another family, another world. The human Mikhail hesitated, then admitted yes, he'd had dreams, of human parents, of a different home, of a place that felt more real than this one, but he'd thought they were just dreams, just fantasies, just his imagination. The changeling Mikhail said they could trade, could swap back, could each go to where they belonged. The human Mikhail would return to his birth parents, would live a human life, would finally feel like he fit, and the changeling Mikhail would stay in the other world, would live with his true parents, would embrace his nature. Both would be happier. Both would be where they belonged. The human Mikhail wanted to agree, but was afraid. This was all he'd known. The Huldra parents were all he'd known. Leaving would be terrifying. The changeling Mikhail understood, said they'd do it together, would support each other, would make the transition as easy as possible. And maybe, once they'd each settled, they could meet, could compare experiences, could be brothers in a strange, cosmic way. The Huldra parents were heartbroken but understanding. They'd stolen the human Mikhail because they wanted a child, because Huldra children were rare, because they'd been desperate. But keeping him had been wrong, had caused suffering, both to him and to the human parents. And keeping the changeling Mikhail would cause more suffering. He didn't belong here anymore, had become too human, would never be fully happy in the other world. The trade was arranged, a ritual performed, old magic invoked, the type that could undo swaps, that could return things to how they should have been. But there was a cost. Both Mikhails would lose their memories. The human Mikhail would forget the other world, would believe he'd always lived with his human parents, would have no memory of the Huldra folk, and the changeling Mikhail would forget his human life, would believe he'd always been a Huldra, would have no memory of Savanlinna or his human family. The changeling Mikhail hesitated. Did he want to forget? Forget his parents who'd raised him? His friends? His life? But he realized the alternative was worse. Continuing to feel wrong, continuing to not belong. This was mercy, a clean break, a chance to start over in the right place. He agreed. Both Mikhails agreed. The ritual began. The Huldra parents sang. The air shimmered. Reality bent. And the two Mikhails switched places. Not physically, dimensionally. Their souls swapped. Their memories began to fade. The human Mikhail felt his otherworld memories dissolving. The changeling Mikhail felt his human memories disappearing. And then both were unconscious, being carried to their proper homes, their proper lives, their proper families. The human Mikhail woke in his childhood bedroom, but he was 28, not 3 days old. The magic had aged him appropriately, given him memories to match. He believed he'd always lived here, always been human. His parents found him, confused. He'd been missing for days. Where had he been? He couldn't remember. Just knew he was home. His parents wept, embraced him, sighed he'd been sleepwalking, had wandered into the forest. They'd been searching everywhere. He accepted the explanation, felt relief, felt like he was finally where he belonged. The wrongness he'd felt his entire life was gone, replaced by rightness, by belonging, by peace. The changeling Mikhail woke in the otherworld hall, remembered nothing of his human life, believed he'd always been Huldra, always lived here. His true parents found him, concerned. He'd been wandering, seemed confused, Was he all right? He said yes. Just disoriented. Maybe he'd been dreaming. They accepted it, were relieved, said he was home, where he belonged, and he felt it, the truth of it. This was where he belonged. The wrongness was gone, replaced by rightness, by belonging, by peace. Both Michaels adjusted to their new old lives. Neither remembered the trade. Neither remembered the other. The magic was complete, the swap undone. Things were as they should have been from the beginning. Years passed. The human Michael married, had children, lived a normal Finnish life, occasionally had strange dreams, of forests that glowed, of creatures that shouldn't exist. But he dismissed them as imagination, as stress, as nothing important. He was happy, content, lived a full life, died old and surrounded by family, never knowing he'd spent the first 28 years of his life in the other world, never knowing he'd been stolen as a baby, never knowing he'd been returned by his changeling replacement. The magic kept his memories sealed, kept his past hidden, gave him peace. The changeling Michael lived in the other world, embraced his nature, became one of the Huldra folk completely, occasionally felt echoes of another life, another family, but dismissed them as dreams, as fantasies, as nothing real. He was happy, content, lived as long as Huldra folk live, which is longer than humans can comprehend, never knowing he'd spent 28 years as a human, never knowing he'd made a sacrifice, never knowing he'd given up a life to set things right. The magic kept his memories sealed, kept his past hidden, gave him peace. The human parents, however, remembered everything. They knew what had happened, knew their real son had returned, knew the changeling had sacrificed his human life to make it right. They mourned him even as they celebrated their son's return. He'd been a good son, had loved them, had made the ultimate sacrifice to give them what they'd lost. They never told the human Michael, never explained what had really happened. The magic wouldn't allow it anyway, but they remembered. And every year on Midsummer's Eve, they went to the fairy mound, left offerings, honey, milk, silver coins, said prayers for the changeling who'd given up his humanity, who'd returned their son, who'd set things right. And sometimes, if conditions were right, if the barrier was thin, they'd see him, the changeling Michael, now fully Huldra, standing at the edge of the other world, looking through into the human realm. He didn't recognize them, didn't remember, but he'd wave, and they'd wave back. And for a moment, the two worlds would touch. Two families connected by love and sacrifice, and the most unusual adoption reversal in history. The changelings of Finland still exist. The Huldra folk still take babies, still leave their own children in human cribs. But occasionally, one remembers, one feels wrong, one seeks to return. And if they're brave enough, if they're selfless enough, if they're determined enough, the trade can be made, the swap undone, things set right. But the cost is always memory, always identity, always the life you've known, because you can't belong to both worlds, can't keep both lives, can't be both human and Huldra. You have to choose, and the choice requires sacrifice, requires giving up everything, requires trust that the other side will be better. That belonging is worth the price. That rightness is worth the loss. The changeling Michael made that choice, gave up his human life, gave up his memories, gave up his identity, to return a stolen child, to correct a cosmic wrong, to set things right. He's forgotten now, lives happily in the other world, never knowing what he sacrificed. But his human parents remember, and they honor him. Every Midsummer's Eve, every year, forever. Because some sacrifices are too great to forget, some acts of love too profound to ignore, some changelings too noble to abandon.